we do have some details now from the Defence Minister Richard Marles, although the picture is still not entirely clear. But what Richard Marles said is that there were essentially 2 helicopters on a training mission, and one of those helicopters, a Taipan, ditched into the water off Hamilton Island. Now, there were 4 aircrew on board. At this stage, they are still missing. Now, we do not know whether there is any prospect of them being found, but you can understand why the Defence Minister and the Chief of the ADF, the CDF, Angus Campbell, were so grim-faced, given this crash happened at about 10:30 p.m. last night. We're now coming up to almost 12 hours after that, and no survivors have yet been found. So you can understand why the CDF and the Defence Minister hold grave fears for their safety. Now, let's take a listen to what the Defence Minister had to say laying out this tragic accident, and the CDF, Angus Campbell, speaking after that as he expressed to the media the deep sorrow that was being felt across the Army on today's events.
But defence exercises, which are so necessary for the readiness of our Defence Force, are serious. They carry risk. And as we desperately hope for better news during the course of this day, we are reminded about the gravity of the act which comes with wearing our nation's uniform.
Indeed, a terrible moment. I really deeply appreciate the assistance that has been provided by a variety of civil agencies, the Queensland Police, the Australian Maritime Safety Agency, and the public, as well as our US allies, all of whom have come together to assist, to continue the search and rescue, and to find our people.
No doubt a very difficult day for the families of the 4 air crewmen. Stephen, what do we know about these helicopters?
Look, I think it is worth pointing out, even at this very early stage, that this fleet of Taipans has been a very troubled one. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean there is anything wrong with the choppers. It could also potentially come down to the way that the ADF has handled them, but there have been a series of accidents and controversies surrounding this fleet. We saw in March earlier this year another helicopter from this fleet, a Taipan, go down in Jervis Bay with 10 personnel on board. Now, that was in shallow waters, and very happily there were no injuries or fatality, or there were no fatalities as a result of that. All 10 personnel were recovered, but the fleet was actually grounded after that, and not long after that happened, it was also revealed by the ABC that, at least in some instances, a critical software patch that's necessary to upgrade the software on these helicopters was not installed on all of those Taipans, with some inside the Army and the Air Force blaming that failure for the accident. Now, the government has actually moved to replace the Taipans with Black Hawks. That was announced by the former government under Peter Dutton. But it has been a troubled fleet with a fraught history. I should stress we do not know the cause of this accident or whether any of these problems that the ABC has reported on previously, amongst others, has anything to do with this specific accident. We will have to wait and see, what information comes out on that. But I think it is worth pointing out that there has been this history of difficulties with the Taipans, and no doubt that that controversy may well deepen after this latest tragic accident.
And of course, this accident is occurring while the Osman talks are underway in Brisbane. How's that how are the negotiations going?
Yeah, that's right, and undeniably this tragic accident will to some extent overshadow what's happening in Osman. At the very least, it will be very much on the minds, I'd say, of all of those who are participating. Perhaps particularly the Defence Minister Richard Marles and Lloyd Austin, the US Defence Secretary, as they sit down in Brisbane with Penny Wong and Antony Blinken, the US Secretary of State. Now, there will be a strong defence focus on these talks, in particular a plan by the United States and Australia to bring forward the capacity for Australia to produce guided weapons and missiles in Australia. They want to start doing that in 2 years. That's a quicker timetable than some anticipated. It will require the United States to actually hand over intellectual intellectual property to stand up that industry here. But it's something that Australia is very pleased with, because it will not only give us the capacity to build up our own stocks, but it will also potentially give the Americans another source of munitions, which could be very useful. We've seen with the war in Ukraine the way that at the moment those stocks can run very low very quickly, and so it makes sense for the United States to diversify. It won't just be security though, there'll also be discussions on climate change and efforts by the US and Australia to try and make the transition to renewables happen much more quickly, particularly in our region, as well as China and its regional ambitions, with Australia and the US determined to do everything possible to try and make sure China doesn't emerge as a major security player in the Pacific.